So it's my very great pleasure to introduce you to Sally Weintrobe, who is going to open this conference. Sally is a fellow of the British Psychoanalytic Society and was part of the founding group of Climate Psychology Alliance in the UK. She chairs the Climate Committee of the International Psychoanalytical Association. And her edited book, Engaging with Climate Change, was a pioneering book in the field. And her more recent book, Psychological Roots of the Climate Crisis, Neoliberal Exceptionalism and the Culture of Uncare, has made a vital contribution to our thinking. And she was also one of 4 contributors to another book, Climate Psychology, A Matter of Life and Death. In short, she has been a pioneer in the field, and the work of Climate Psychology Alliance has a wonderful foundation in the work of its pioneers. So over to you, Sally.
Hello, thank you. It's a great honor to be asked to introduce this first global PsyFuture meeting together. I want to just thank you for asking me. I'm going to refer to some notes that I've made along the way. So I just want to celebrate the emergence of climate psychology as reflected in this event and by the organizations that are here. So first of all, to celebrate that and the work that's gone into at all levels, the organizational work, the conceptual work, the struggle work, and so on. I also want to, right up front, acknowledge how far we have to go. Because if you look at the organizations that have signed up so far, it becomes obvious that, they do not represent hardly any voices, and certainly at an organizational level yet, from what we now loosely still call the Global South. So, all the way through what I say, I will be making reference to this. And some of its implications. I also want to stress something vital in the coming together of this symposium today, in the bold imagination which conceives of a future, and a just future, that even the title of this symposium and the grouping, global climate psychology for a just future. Each one of those words is vitally important for us to take in and register and provide us with hope and focus. And it assumes a bold, lively, entitled imagination to see a way through. So I want to acknowledge that and thank everybody for that. And also just to acknowledge that, despite the difficulties we face, this has been organized as a global event with its 2 time zones. This is vital, and thank you. So I want to just pick up, obviously I'm going to be taking my own slant on things. Everybody will have their own on the emergence of climate psychology, but I wanted just to focus on just a few areas. One, starting with the emergence of climate psychology, then moving on to what is climate psychology. That's a funny order to be doing it in, but I want to do it in that order. And then I want to note how the issues of global justice and injustice run through everything that I will be saying. And then finally, I want to turn to the question of leadership, climate leadership, which is also in the title of today's symposium. So starting with the emergence of climate psychology, I want to begin with a conversation that I had with I think, a very great thinker, Harald Walser, in 2014, he wrote this book called Climate Wars, which was a very prescient book at the time. And I recommend it to everybody, especially given, and I want to acknowledge the context in which we're meeting today with the Israeli-Gaza conflict going on, and I'm sure affecting how we're all feeling. Anyway, I met Harold Walser, and he said when he was putting together that book, what he swiftly realized was that there was no place on the academic and thinking map for what he wanted to say. It just didn't exist. And that was the thing that struck him the most, and that's what he was struggling to find a place on the map. And of course, what he was dealing with was the way in which, you know, one set of things influences another. Ecology influences conflict. Conflict influences ecology. And I want to start with that because it equally applies to the emergence of climate psychology. Climate psychology, again, had no space on the map. And we're talking really as recently back as I would say about 2010, that sort of time. Very similar timing for the work that Walser was doing in his field. And so one could see that there were outliers in climate psychology, people who already had the vision for what was to come. And I'm really not going to try and mention everybody. It's a hopeless task. So please forgive me who I've left out. But I would like to single out Ro Randall, who was already working on climate conversations, and also René Lertzman, who was already doing her work integrating depth psychology with a climate psychology perspective right then, and people who were involved with initiating Climate Psychology Alliance, which was actually founded by Paul Hoggett, who was also working in this field, and Adrian Tate. So I think those were, I think, the outliers of climate psychology. You know, imagine motorbikes sort of riding on the outline of it, or outlying discipline of a discipline that's emerging, trying to emerge and find its place. And of course, there were also many, many strands coming in, you know, social psychology, Tim Kasser, Tom Crompton, bringing in values. I couldn't possibly go into it all. Ecology, you know, all the strands that were there. So this is a discipline trying to find its place on a map that didn't then exist. But what I want to do is take so it was breaking discipline molds, and it was also integrating in new ways and trying to find its place. It's a bit like a flock of birds taking off in the same direction. So if we step back, what was happening? And what occurs to me that was happening was that we were beginning to confront a great decentering of mind, decentering from its position, which is of course embedded, of being seeing itself as dominant, as omniscient, verging on omniscient, and in control. We also, at the same time, we were seeing mind breaking with modernity, which was no longer adequate, and modernity's project. And then, crucially, I want to mention as fundamental the seminal book by Donella Meadows called Limits to Growth, because this was really stemmed from the 1970s, when it really, for the first time, I think humanity really got limits, limits to growth, limits to what we could take, so on and so forth. And also, at the same time, a complexity was brought in, complexity theory. And complexity theory is the acknowledgement that systems affect each other. So to go back to Valsa, if you damage the economy, and that will have an effect on the psyche and on the social. And the psyche and social will have an effect on the economy. We were beginning to see a new way of seeing. And this is something that goes to the heart of climate psychology. And this was the emergent struggle that climate psychology was facing. So to say now, well, what is, anyway, no, I just wanted to say back, yes, so just before I go on to climate psychology, the signs of the emergence of this new discipline, you can see in the growth of publications, the beginnings of organizations with publications, literally the establishment of spaces in libraries. I was so delighted this year to see in the Psychoanalytic University of Berlin, the person who was taking me around saying, here is our shelf for climate psychology with its title. This is all very important, actually. And also funding starts coming into it, which is also critical. You also, because of the, it's not only our efforts, it's also the ecological and climate situation that you started to see the breakthrough of people getting in touch with their realistic anxieties about the state of nature and climate. And that breaking through, that has also played a major role in the growth of climate psychology with what's called climate emotions, climate anxiety, and climate trauma bursting through, and a dialogue being started also with journalists, and that all got going, and that has also fed into the birth of our discipline, this new discipline, waves of seeing. So here, I also, you saw waves of grief emerging. You saw mind operating to struggle to take in reality, and you saw a group of people emerging who could speak to that and try and give it a shape and an understanding. Now, at this point, I just want to bring in global justice because, of course, this has been such an uneven development. It's largely happened in what we loosely call the global north. And just to bring this home, within the last month, I spoke to a journalist a Reuters journalist from Bangladesh, who said, "Can you help? We are suffering climate trauma here. We have flooding, and we have no climate psychologists." And I think we really need to take in the implications of this. And, it was very hard to talk with him, hear him say that, and take in the reality of what he was saying. And so global justice, we're talking about global injustice with all its implications and causations. So I want to stress that. Moving on to climate psychology itself, as I've said, it's a group of, it's really about the study of mind in an age of change and the adoption of complexity theory, where we can no longer partition mind into something that is only the individual in some decontextualized context. And one of the things that the recent book, Climate Psychology, which was co-authored by Wendy Holloway, Paul Hoggart, Chris Robertson, and myself, brings into focus. By the way, I'd like to just mention the work that Wendy Holloway, who I think is the chief author, put into that. But one of the ways it frames climate psychology is to say it's really it needs the perspective of the eco-psyche social. And when you consider that, and each one of those needs expanding in a way that I can't possibly approach at the moment. But when you consider that, you see how each of those interacts with the others. Each of those branches out into different areas of study, and each needs, consideration. So that's one thing I would say that's an exciting development, actually, to conceptualize the eco-psyche social. So that if you're talking about psyche, you have to take into account ecology. You have to take into account and embed what you're thinking about in terms of not only ecology and the state of the ecological systems, but you also have to embed it within the social. And the social, of course, has many aspects. It includes economics, it includes history, it includes culture, and we have our work cut out, but this is the terrain that we're in now. And we've seen an enormous amount of work going on to try to understand the effects on mind of different systems interacting in both and multiple directions. This, I think, is where we are now. And of course, another aspect of complexity is that when we talk about mind, we're also no longer talking about just individual mind. We're talking about the group mind in all its complexity, so that, you can't really say, I think, therefore I am. You're saying, I think, therefore we are, and we are enables us to think, embedded within an ecology. This is the kind of discipline and way of thinking that we're evolving in climate psychology. It's challenging, and it's also will have a great deal of impact on theory, basically. And I'm emphasizing that aspect of things. I'm aware I could have approached this in many different ways, but that's the way that that's what I'm signaling out. So again, if you want to look at the social, and I would say injustice aspects of where we are now, I think we must take into account colonization and its effects on mind, the fracturing effects it's had on mind, and also, in particular, the way in which it's sort of introduced a kind of monoculture, which I've worked on in particular as a culture of uncare, very much embedded in current economic frameworks. What it's done is it has silenced and delegitimized voices that are not so fractured and damaged by this culture. And those voices are absolutely needed if we are going to develop a climate psychology that is a global climate psychology, and also one that actually reflects paths forward and something more truthful. So, I think we need to recognize the silencing of indigenous voices, voices from other cultures, and the need to get into dialogue, and then to also face the problems of, because of global injustice at the moment, how difficult that task is. Also, the effects of racism and lack of respect for other points of view. In order to develop a climate psychology, we have to have a democracy of many voices to listen to, and we are a global village, and we need those voices to be able to develop our theory ways of seeing. Another thing that I think I would like to emphasize with climate psychology and its emergence is that it's restored sort of dignity to interiority. In terms of the culture of uncare, it has tended to think we don't even have an interior life. You know, we just study behaviors and, you know, and numbers and so on and so forth. I think we've seen, you know, climate psychology has actually restored the need to study the interior of life and its struggles. And it also has emphasized how you know, climate wars go on at all levels. They go on within the psyche, between parts that care, parts that don't care, and these are power struggles. And so climate psychology acknowledges that, and it also acknowledges the need for understanding that we need frameworks and systems in order to enable care to flourish at the same time as restrain uncare. We need to understand a lot more about this. So I think this is the sort of area that we're in right now in emerging climate psychology. I'd better get a move on. Okay, just to say, so I think what I'd like to say about leadership, because the title of our symposium is From Therapy to Climate Leadership. Not all climate psychologists are therapists, and indeed, since climate psychology is today's systemic study of mind, we are all climate psychologists. You know, but there is, I want to acknowledge the role that therapists and depth psychology in particular has played in the emergence of climate psychology as we're finding it today. I've forgotten the beginning of what I was saying there now. Oh yes, leadership. So there's so much to say about leadership. I think what I wanted to emphasize is that what I take, and it's very, you know, I'm aware that it's very partial what I'm saying, but what I take with my background in therapy is that I've recognized that, you know, we've needed to push forwards outside the silo of, you know, the individual therapy session seen as some kind of psychic retreat where you don't need to absorb culture, ecology, you don't need to embed things. That I think is breaking down. You know, you need to take in racism, sexism, ecology, and wider anxieties. So, you know, there's that, and now I've again forgotten what oh yes, leadership. However, you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We each have our disciplined practices. We each have studied, you know, approached reality in a disciplined way to try and see what's truthful more clearly. And what I take from my therapy background is some sort of staying with things that are very emotionally difficult, absorbing them, and recognizing that they must be absorbed and worked through by me before I can have anything to say about them. That I need, and therapists in general need, a great deal of support from colleagues to do this, and from other people to do this work, recognizing how difficult it is. You know, that there's a kind of, I'm very wary of hope, but that there's a kind of hopefulness that I take that comes from, you know, I wouldn't take a patient on unless I thought I had something to offer. I think I bring that kind of approach to my work with climate psychology. There are these kind of grounded, I'm grounded in my discipline, but I've had to rethink it in quite radical ways. So I think we really mustn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And the other thing that I'd emphasize is the real value in my training of always approaching things of, on the one hand, on the other hand, and never losing, you know, complexity, nuance, and also being able to be in a situation and step back from it so that you can actually look on at it. It's that movement, that sort of triangulating movement. So these are the things that I've brought from my background, and I think it's probably wise that we all find, our own, do the work, the ongoing work of finding what helps us stay with something truthful from our own backgrounds. Nearly finished now. Because I think it'll make us better able to be climate leaders, because I think we need to be very careful in how we talk to people, whether it's the media, whether it's wherever it is, in groups, in climate conversations, to understand how traumatized people are. I think that we're in a world now where people, full stop, in whatever different ways, are deeply traumatized. And I think we need to take that on board, understand people's fragility, understand how it sets off all kinds of psychological reactions, take a step back and appreciate that, and be very careful and measured in how we talk to people. I think this is very important in our role as leaders. So I just want to say two things before I stop, which are perhaps things that are influencing my thinking going ahead. Two contributions. The first is a book that's coming out very, very soon, by Robert J. Lifton. He's written this book aged 96. I imagine many of you will know of him, but basically I think that his analysis and his experience of deep trauma in his work with Hiroshima victims, Nazi doctors, brainwashing, so on and so forth, and he's also worked on climate, on and on, and filtered through the recent experience with COVID, has actually really deepened a way of seeing the fact that we are now dealing with death anxieties. And he brings in climate as well. And I think I recommend this because I think it's going to deepen our analysis even further, and how sophisticated he is in talking about survival and renewal that comes, the renewal that also comes through the grief work and the difficulty of working through death anxieties, of literal death and impending death and so on. I recommend this book. I think it's called Survival and Renewal. It's his book coming out. The other thing that I would want to mention is that I've just finished reading Naomi Klein's Doppelganger, which I also recommend, because there I think you will see, or I saw, really struck me, was how deeply integrated climate psychology is by now in the thinking of people like Naomi Klein. And it is, she's really talking about the forces that we contend with, the caring and uncaring forces that we contend with, which she's framing as, the doppelganger and the mirroring. And I think it's to end, it's a sign of how integrated climate psychology's thinking is becoming in mainstream progressive thought. Thank you.
Sally, thank you very much indeed.